First of all, I would like to just thank everyone for jumping on tonight and spending this evening with us. Um, and I do want to say thank you to Dr. Foster. When I approached him and I asked him to do this for us, he did not hesitate at all. So I am very grateful that he chose to do this for us. We are in for a treat. I'm excited. I've been anxious all day. But again, I do thank everyone for joining in to tonight's presentation. I Don't Like the Blues, a conversation about race, place, and Mississippi by Dr. Foster. Before I introduce him, I would like to make a few announcements. This is being recorded, so if some of your colleagues or some other people that were interested in hearing this presentation would like to, then it will be available. We'll send out a link. I'll get with Coach Mays and we'll make that happen. And we would also like to invite you to comment and ask questions. There is a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, but I do ask that you do that after he's done presenting. Let's hold off all questions until then. You can go ahead and type your question in the chat box, but let's hold off for the discussion portion of this presentation to do the question and answers. You may also raise your hand. There's a raise your hand feature. So if you would like to speak or verbally ask your question at the end of the presentation, then that is also an option. And then lastly, there will be an attendance form at the end of the presentation for students who are attending. If your instructor is providing you extra credit for attendance, then we will provide that link at the end of the presentation. Again, I am very honored to be able to be here tonight, and I'm honored to have the opportunity to introduce Dr. Brian Foster. And I will introduce him now. Dr. Brian Foster is a writer and sociologist from Mississippi. He earned his PhD in sociology from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and he currently works as an assistant professor of sociology and Southern studies at the University of Mississippi. Professor Foster studies neighborhood change and economic development in rural contexts, especially communities that have historically been home to Black Americans. His work also gives voice to cultural traditions that Black communities have established, maintained, and adapted in the face of the rampant, often violent changes around them. In his new book, I Don't Like the Blues, Race, Place, and the Backseat of Black Life, Professor Foster takes this research agenda to the Mississippi Delta. The book follows Black residents of Clarksdale as they navigate the on-the-ground impacts of substantial demographic restructuring in the Delta region, and as they make sense of the town's attempt to use blues and heritage tourism as a tool to rebuild the town's economic infrastructure. At the University of Mississippi, Professor Foster teaches courses on race, place, storytelling, and sociological research methods. His teaching has been supported by the Sally McDonald Barksdale Honors College, and his courses are among the most popular in several campus departments. In 2020, Dr. Foster was named the University of Mississippi's Teacher of the Year by the Mississippi Humanities Council. Professor Foster has also built an impressive portfolio of public sociology and storytelling ventures. He currently serves as the director of the Mississippi Hill Country Oral History Collective, and alongside his collective, Dr. James J.T. Thomas is the incoming co-editor of the journal Sociology of Race and Ethnicity. His public writing has appeared in local, regional, and national outlets, including Oxford Magazine, Mississippi Fork Life, Bitter Southerner, Gravy, CNN, and the Washington Post. At this time, it is a great honor to present to you guys Dr. Brian Foster.
Carrie, thank you for that introduction. And Carrie and Ms. Brenda, thank y'all for the invitation. I'm happy to be here and excited for what I do hope can be a bit of a conversation. I have some comments that I have kind of prepared to work through. I think that'll take maybe 35 minutes or so, depending on how much I feel like talking, I guess. And then I do want to hear questions from the folks that are here. Questions about anything. They can be questions about, so what I hope to talk about today, who I am, where I'm from, what I do, kind of how I got here. And then on the back end, I do want to talk about the book a little bit. And so questions can be about anything. I get the most excited when I'm able to talk with folks, to hear kind of what y'all are thinking and to respond accordingly. So don't be shy about questions. As Carrie mentioned, feel free to drop them in the chat. I do have, I need to share my sound too. I do have some visuals because I'm kind of a visual person. I think is important. I think it kind of helps with engagement. And so I'll just kind of jump in. The first bit will be biography, just again who I am, where I'm from, and then I'll get into some of the work that I do. So I'm as I always say, and I say as often as I can, I'm a Black boy from Shannon, Mississippi, born and raised in Shannon. I'm so excited that I'm talking to people who at least many of y'all will know where I'm talking about. I don't have to say outside of Tupelo or 2 hours south of Memphis or an hour from Oxford. I can just say Shannon and y'all know where I'm talking about. Born and raised there, graduated high school in 2007. After a year and a half at a school in Minnesota, I transferred to the University of Mississippi. The story of the Minnesota story is kind of roundabout and long, and I can get into that in the Q&A if people are interested. But I transferred to the University of Mississippi in 2009, where I studied. I majored in African American Studies. And this is when the University of Mississippi is when I ultimately, I think, I was sort of planting the seeds that would grow into the journey that I have ended up taking through grad school and now as a writer and a sociologist who thinks and asks questions about race and place and other things. I graduated from the University of Mississippi in 2011. And right after the University of Mississippi, I went to University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill for grad school, sociology PhD program. The grad school idea for me started percolating the summer before my senior year at Ole Miss. Before then, I didn't know what a PhD was. I didn't know. I had taken a few sociology classes, so I had no idea what getting a PhD in sociology meant or would look like. But I'm thankful. I'm so grateful I had a team of mentors who had my best interests at heart, and who gave what has proven to be some really valuable advice and perspective, ultimately advice and perspective that pushed me to get the PhD. And I'll talk about the kind of journey through the PhD a little bit later. But I earned the PhD in 2017. So at this point, it's been a few years now. And around that time, actually a year before, so I was both a PhD student and entering my first year as assistant professor of sociology and Southern Studies. I have a little commercial that me and my colleagues in the sociology and anthropology department that we shot a few years back that I like to play, both because it gives some background about and some context about the kind of work that I do, the kind of questions that I ask. And then it also, I think, is educational for folks who may not actually know or all the way know what sociology is. I think it can be useful for that. It's just a few minutes. And then after I play that, I'll come back and kind of pick up where I left off. I think about sociology as every day and everything. We study it because we are interested in reaching some level of insight or enlightenment about us and about the world that we live in.
Sociology is a study of society. That might be looking at politics, at culture, at the environment, health disparities, religion, gender, sexuality, just to name a few. So it's really about studying people watching. If you're into that and asking people questions about what they think and why they think the way they do, it's a perfect discipline for you.
The point of sociology is to understand that why the world is the way that it is complicated sometimes. So if you want to understand problems, it really helps to understand how individuals interact with the groups and institutions that surround them.
It really clicked for me that if I wanted to change things, I need to understand not only how they really are, but why they are. And I thought sociology was the way to do that.
Coming here, I thought I had an idea of how things worked, and I realized I don't. There's a lot more to these systems that are in place, and there's a lot more that can be changed. There's a lot more that really we don't talk about, that they don't discuss on the news. And I think in sociology specifically, they're always asking why or how or why is this the way it is? And me, I've always been that person that's questioned everything. And so feeling like that's supported, that I'm actually encouraged to do that, is really why I feel like this field is such a good fit for me.
In doing sociological work, we use research to inform what's happening, to move from just taking for granted basic assumptions to actually using and scrutinizing data to better understand that.
We prioritize not only being in the field and talking to folks ourselves, but giving students those opportunities too.
For me, sociology is about applying what we know about how society works to institute change. I'm an applied sociologist, I'm a rural sociologist, so I look at things that are specific to rural places that make them different, and then how do we utilize that knowledge to improve livelihoods and well-being in those spaces.
We are able to gather the hard data that will inform policymakers' decisions, which will in turn create positive change for the local community or society at large.
Honestly, I think Mississippi is fascinating. There's so much history, there's so much tradition, there's so much culture here. It's a great place to kind of see systems and structures that are really ingrained in society. And so me being a pre-law major, knowing how the world works on a daily basis is really going to help me figure out like what field of law I want to go into, or if I even want to do law.
One of the great things about this field is it does really allow you to follow your passion and follow your spirit. And you see represented in our department people who are pursuing various issues and various questions surrounding issues that they care very passionately about. All sociologists are kind of united in trying to understand not just how the world works, but how we can help it work better.
The best and most important sociology has to touch people, has to be among people in some way or another. And I'm surrounded by folks whose work does exactly that.
So as you heard me say, probably overly dramatically at the end there, the most important sociology, I think, has to touch people, has to take place among people, has to invite the communities that are at the focus of the questions that we, sociology, asks. It has to invite those communities in to the table. And that's what I try to do. That's what my work does. Is through the perspectives, through conversations with people, with local folks. I ask stories about place, and I tell those stories about place. That might mean asking questions about, writing about, thinking about how places came to be, the histories of places. It may mean asking questions about what's called placemaking, all of the things that communities do to make a place habitable and sustaining. So think churches and grocery stores and other community organizations, all of the things that communities, that families do to build places where they can be happy and whole, where young people can be happy and whole, so forth and so on. I study the way places change and how communities navigate those changes. Those changes could be folks moving into or out of a neighborhood, racial turnover, a neighborhood that used to be all white is now racially mixed or all black. This could be changes in terms of the economic structure, a place that used to have a stable economy, maybe a factory that was providing jobs is now seeing the other side of that, where maybe the factory is no longer there, and folks are not able to work and provide in ways that they used to. That's what I mean by place. History, contemporary experiences, culture, economic systems, all these different things. For me, with the fundamental goal of getting a sense of how people live and how people make sense of the world, and some of the needs that communities, some of the things that communities need or feel like they need or say that they need in order to build and make better lives for themselves. And it was at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, in grad school, where this interest in place started to kind of take root for me. I got to UNC Chapel Hill thinking that I wanted to study race and education. And so I was reading books and articles. I was reading all of these different things about the experiences of Black students in schools, which was my primary interest early on. And what I found in literature is that folks had lots and lots to say about the experiences of students in places like Chicago or Detroit or Philly or New York or Baltimore or Boston or California. Noticing the pattern. Y'all noticing the pattern, right? There were no accounts of schools in the rural South. No accounts of schools in Memphis or Atlanta. I know that's the urban South, but certainly no accounts of schools in the Delta, in the Mississippi Hill Country, in the Alabama Black Belt. And so it was from this absence of not seeing my experience, many of y'all's experiences, the experiences of people that I knew, that I had grown up with, not seeing those experiences on the page pushed me more and more toward questions that centered around place. How does place matter for the lives that people have? To talk about kind of my experience in the PhD program, because I think the timeline is helpful both in kind of further sketching how my interest in place developed, but also in ultimately talking about the book, which I'll get to in not too long from now. So the first 2 years of, in general, any PhD program, especially a research-focused doctoral program, the first couple years are coursework. So you graduate high school, you do your undergrad, 4, 5, 6 years, whatever. You finish undergrad and you get to grad school. You get to the PhD program. The first 2 years, you taking courses. The third year, you maybe are taking courses, not as many as in the first 2 years, and then you have to take and pass what are called, for us, comprehensive exams. Virtually every discipline, every field has some type of qualifying exam that you have to take and pass. For us, we call them comps, comprehensive exams. Those come in your third year. Your fourth year, you're now thinking about your own research agenda, your own research program. And what that looks like practically is you have to write a dissertation proposal. Here is the literature that I want to engage. Here are the questions that I have. Here is why this project is important, that sort of thing. For me, my fifth and sixth year looked like field work. So in my fourth year at the dissertation proposal stage, I had some external funding. I had some time and flexibility. Around my third and fourth year, I knew that I wanted my dissertation research to be place-based, right? So this is this developing interest in place. And I knew that the place was going to be in the South, and I knew that the place was going to be in the SIP. I wanted to come back here. And by my fifth year in the program, and this would have been 2014, that's what I did. I moved to Clarksdale. The story of how I got to Clarksdale, again, is long and roundabout. That can come up in the Q&A if people are interested. But in my fifth year, I arrived, and it's really in my fourth year, but in my fifth year, fully, I arrived in Clarksdale, and I'll talk about what I did in a second. Fifth and sixth year, I spent in Clarksdale doing field work. Seventh year, I'm doing dissertation writing. I'm also working my first year as a professor at the University of Mississippi. Again, that's a longer story, but in general, this was the progression: coursework to comps, to proposal, to field work, to dissertation writing. And again, years 4 through 6 is when the work that I wanted to do. I tell stories of place, right? This is how I talk about what I do. It's in the 4th, 5th, and 6th year that becomes clear to me. And it's in the 4th, 5th, and 6th year that I arrive in Clarksdale, working on a project that I really didn't have a clear sense of what shape it would take when it was all said and done. I went to Clarksdale with a particular set of, it's like that movie, with a particular set of skills. But I had been trained in ethnography, which is a research method. I've been trained in ethnography in the first few years in the program. What ethnography is, or what ethnography involves, is a researcher going to some place. Let's say the researcher is interested in schools. The researcher goes and spends some amount of time in some number of schools. Let's say the researcher, is interested in labor market dynamics and workplace dynamics. Then the researcher goes, and I went to school with a woman who wrote a book based on some work she did working in a meat packing plant. And so that is a type of ethnography where you take a job somewhere and you spend some time working in a place, and then you leave and you write about it. For me, I'm interested in place. I'm interested in community life. What does that mean? It means I got to go to a place. I got to go and spend some time in some communities. And for me, that was Clarksdale. You go to the place, you get there. Number one, you observe. You live in the place. You get a sense of what life is like. You go to as many things as you can. You watch. You pay attention. Number two, you talk to folks. Interviews, on the record, informal conversations in the street, at the grocery store, at the football game, so forth and so on. Again, just getting a sense of what life is like in the place, some of the concerns that people have, some of the aspirations that folks have. And all along the way, you are documenting. So your observations, you take what I call field notes, where you're describing everything that you are seeing and experiencing, any thoughts that you have about it. You're documenting conversations, whether it's recording an on-the-record interview or taking down notes after an informal conversation. And in general, that's what ethnography is. It's spending time in a place, paying attention to life as you live it, talking to local folks, getting a sense of their perspectives and experiences in the place, and documenting it all along the way. For me, I think it takes more than that to know a place. Place is not just what's happening right now, and it's not just what's happening on the ground. History matters. So in my work in Clarksdale, I'm looking at census data from 1970 and 1960 and 1950 and so forth. I'm reading through archival documents and historical accounts of Clarksdale, and I'm also getting a sense of how people talk about the place. I grew up in Shannon. Depending on who I'm talking to, if somebody asks me where I'm from, I might tell them I'm from Johnson Chapel. That's the name of my neighborhood, right? That's how we talk about neighborhoods in Shannon, Johnson Chapel, Pine Grove, Union Baptist. Y'all have names for the neighborhoods that y'all grew up in. If you talk to some folks, you might say, I'm from Boonville, I'm from Tupelo, I'm from Verona. But if you talk to other folks, you might say, I'm from Bolly Courts, or you name the neighborhood, right? There are distinctive names for the particular area where we grow up and make life. The same is the case in Clarksdale. So for me, as an ethnographer, one question that I have, once I'm hearing folks say, I'm from Oakport, I'm from Oakhurst, I'm from Riverton, I'm from the Brickyard, is where is that at, right? And so what you see here is a map of Clarksdale, delineated by the neighborhoods that people say they live in, right? So I'm getting a mapping, a topographical image of life in Clarksdale. Oakhurst is here, these neighborhood blocks. Black Downtown is here, Riverton is here, the Brickyard is here. The census, what you see here is the same map, but delineated with census place designations. I know this is getting in the weeds, but it makes the point. The census delineates places. In a number of ways, right? We know there's the United States, there's nation. There are states. There's Alabama, Tennessee, Mississippi. In states, there are counties: Lee County, Pontotoc County, Prentiss County. In counties, there are places, cities, towns. And then we get to these smaller place designations. There are census tracts, which you see here The bottom central, you see CT 9503. That's Census Tract 9503. So these are these relatively large areas that exist inside of towns and cities. And then there are census block groups. You see those scattered across the screen, BG1, BG2, so forth and so on. And then there are census blocks, which you can think of as like neighborhood blocks. The reason that this is valuable is that the census collects all types of demographic data: race, gender, socioeconomic status, so like poverty, internet connectivity, all these different types of data that the census collects and files according to these various types of place designations. So if I go back and I know that, well, everybody who say they live in Oakhurst, that they live in this part of the city, and everybody that says they live in the Brickyard in this part of the city, now I can talk about poverty in Oakhurst, and I can talk about educational attainment in the Brickyard, and I can talk about racial demographics in Riverton. Again, another way of talking about place in ways that people actually experience and live place, right? And so I'm doing all of this in Clarksdale. I'm living in Clarksdale. I'm going to as many things as I can go to in Clarksdale: football games, basketball games, Christmas parades, church, so forth and so on. I'm talking to local folks. I'm documenting everything. I'm pulling data from the archives. I'm reading historical accounts of Clarksdale and the Delta. I'm doing this other type of demographic analysis where I'm paying attention to where people say they are from, and I'm mapping that onto what Clarksdale looks like spatially, and then mapping that onto data that the census collects. And then I get to a point, so I go back, I get to a point in year 7 as a PhD student where I'm both writing the dissertation based on all of that stuff I just said, and then I'm also working through my first year as a professor at the university. And then after the dissertation, so now we're in 2018, and the next couple years is book writing. So the dissertation is one document. I think mine was 200 and something pages or whatever. And then the book becomes another document. You pull information from the dissertation, but the book is a different beast. It's a different genre of writing. And that's what I spent the next few years doing after defending the dissertation and earning the PhD into my second year as a faculty member at the university. 2, I submitted the final manuscript early 2020, and then the book drops on December 14th of 2020 of last year. In general, I could specify my research question in a lot of ways. In general, this was the question that motivated all that stuff I did, the observing and the talking and the historical accounts and the demographic data. This is the question that motivates it. What is life like in the contemporary rural South? Not in slavery times, as some folks say. Not at the turn of the century in Jim Crow. Not civil rights movement, contemporary, post-1960s. In popular culture, in conventional thinking, people who are perhaps not from the South, they typically think / assume that life stops in places like Mississippi in 1968. Life stops in places like Mississippi when Martin Luther King is assassinated, when we get the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act. Bet, good, closed book, that's all. What my book offers, what my question asks is like, bruh, it's been 80 years. It's been 60 years. I can't do math. Y'all do the math. 2021 minus 19. Like it's been 2 generations since the civil rights movement. What has life been like in the rural South in that span? And how have Black folks in the rural South lived it? What have their experiences been like? What are their perspectives about everyday life, about some of the pressing challenges, about the things that they want to see moving forward? Because again, similarly, contrary to what we might hear and see in pop culture or hear from folks not from here, there will be life after this moment. There is a future for the rural South. So these are the kind of questions that I'm grappling with and that I'm thinking through, and that I try to answer in the book. I talk in 3 ways. I answer the question, this question, what's life been like, and how have Black folks been living it? I talk about it in 3 ways. I talk about emotions and identity. I talk about place and placemaking. I talk about what some folks will call speculation. So when you think about the future and you imagine what my life will be like, what this community's life will be like, some things that I would like to see for my kids when they are as old as I am now, so forth and so on, speculation and critique. And in each case, as you see in the title of the book, I don't like, you see in the bullet points, I don't like, I don't go, I don't want. The grand point that I want to make, that I make in the book, is that there's value in, worthwhile listening to the negative things that people say. American culture in general, I think there's certainly, actually, I don't want to say that. American culture in general, there is a desire to rush towards positivity and optimism and hope, and happy endings and redemption. All things that are valuable, I think, and in a lot of ways for obvious reasons. What I say here is, well, what happens if we don't rush so quickly? If we actually pay attention to what people don't like, not what they love, not what they desire, not what they want, but what they don't like, what they are frustrated by. Let's not pay attention to, I say here, bullet point 2, not all of the beautiful things that folks do to make places, to place make. When we think about, religious traditions and church, when we think about all of the things that other types of social institutions and places do, bad, good, fine. But let's pay attention to there's some people who don't go to some certain types of places, there, so forth and so on. What happens if we try to understand that, where people don't go? And then to the final point, in terms of thinking about the future, what if we actually listen to and interrogate what people say, I don't want to see in the future? I'm not with that. I don't like that. That's the kind of grand narrative of the book. That's this idea of the backbeat, the negatives, the counter spaces, the things that we typically that typically make us uncomfortable: frustration, pessimism, exhaustion. And I can say more. I actually don't want to go in the weeds too much on the findings at 6:35. That's a good time. So that's a little bit about, and I think I kept it together because I can kind of ramble and go left a little bit. But that's a little bit about who I am and what I do and how I got from Shannon to Oxford, a professor at the University of Mississippi, which is a 60-mile drive, an hour drive, but the journey has been longer and more roundabout than that. And then I talk a little bit about the book, which y'all can find wherever you get your books from. If folks are interested in, it's a $25 book. If that's too pricey for folks, my Twitter handle is here. Y'all can feel free to reach out, and there are other ways for y'all to get your hands on the book. For me, and I'm done, and we can take some questions. But for me, it's the most important thing for me when it comes to this book and all of my work is just that people, that the people who I care about and the places that motivated me to do this kind of work can get their hands on it and let me know, yeah, this rings true. This is us. Or no, I don't think you got that part right. Accountability is something that's, especially accountability for the people who I think are, and for me, the people who I think are responsible for where I am and what I've done. It's family, it's community, but it's also, in a broader sense, it's Black communities in the SIP. It's Black communities in the South. So yeah, I'm interested. I wonder if there are questions or comments or anything like that. We got plenty of time, and I'm excited to hear from y'all. Thank y'all so much for the time.
So we thank you for that. That was very, very insightful. And I do see that we have 2 questions. Let's see. I'll read the first. It says, what is your opinion on Max Weber's work? Also, what book would you suggest to read that gives the best insight into his work?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. Somebody must be taking like a sociology class. So Max Weber is you in any discipline, sociology, psych, whatever. You typically you kind of have to learn to read and learn like the founding figures of the discipline. Who are the folks whose work or whose ideas kind of established what the discipline is, what in this case sociology is. So for us, that's folks like Karl Marx, Emile Durkheim, Auguste Comte, and then you get somebody like Max Weber. What's often left out of those types of conversations, the founding figures conversations, are the contributions that people of color made, the contributions that women made, and so for example. You'll often hear in a sociology course about Emile Durkheim and Max Weber, but maybe you don't hear about W.E.B. Du Bois. Maybe you don't hear about the importance of the work of somebody like Ida B. Wells or even Zora Neale Hurston. And so that's the first kind of thing that comes to mind when I hear the names of the folks who are assumed to be the founding figures of a discipline, is to make sure that the portrait that we paint of the folks whose ideas contributed is not just diverse, because it ain't just about diversity. It's about accuracy. It's about whose ideas and whose work actually painted the kind of parameters of the discipline. To the spirit of the question, Max Weber is someone whose work is like whose tradition of work. Mine is definitely in the realm of. Max Weber asks questions about race, gender, social class, power, inequality. Max Weber is someone who's in conversation with W.B. Du Bois, who's the first Black PhD from Harvard, who pioneered American sociology. You can tell by the names: Weber, Marx, Durkheim. These are folks who are not American, which is not a bad thing at all. It just is what it is. But when it comes to American sociology, when it comes to empirical sociology, I've talked about ethnography. This is where you get the work of W.B. Du Bois, who's in conversation with Max Weber. You can read their correspondence. They wrote letters and traded ideas. My favorite book by Weber is probably The Protestant Ethic and Spirit of Capitalism, which is like required reading for most like intro sociology classes. But I also think that, like, if you want to know about Max Weber's work, you should read The Souls of Black Folk, which is W.B. Du Bois, or you should read The Philadelphia Negro. And I think that was always a two-part question. I appreciate that. That's so funny to get. I really appreciate questions like that. As somebody who teaches at least one time a year an intro class, and I do talk about Weber, and people do read. I do have my students read at least excerpts of his work. Other questions? I appreciate that one.
You kind of started answering the next one, but the next question was, are there any books that have caught your eye recently, or what other books do you suggest?
Yeah, I'll talk about this one book. So there's one of my mentors, somebody whose work I respect, and not that I try to emulate, because I got my own voice and my own style, but whose work, the language I use is clear space for me. So I call myself a writer as much as I do a sociologist or professor or anything like that. I write. I do things with language. I storytell. If folks go to my website, bbrianfoster.com, you can see any number of essays that I've written. And then the book, I Don't Like the Blues, is not the typical book that you get from an academic or a sociologist. And so one book that I'll talk about is this book, Heavy, by a writer named Kiese Layman, Kiese, last name Laymon. It's a memoir. A memoir is like a book about my life that I think has like a big lesson for the world. That's what like a memoir is. Heavy is a memoir, and Kiese is from Mississippi. Kiese is from Jackson, Mississippi. He says that in his contract, when folks ask him to come speak, he in the contract they have to say, Kiese Layman is a Black writer from Jackson, Mississippi. And the book it won all kinds of awards. It's been out for a few years now. It won all kinds of awards, national, regional, otherwise. It is one of the most important and highly acclaimed pieces of American literature in the last decade. And it's also a book about Mississippi. It's a Mississippi book, and it's a Black Mississippi book in particular. Or I should say, it's a book about a Black boy and his experiences in Black Mississippi that I think has lessons for Mississippi in general, the South in general, the nation in general. Heavy is a book that I would point to. What other book? Is there another book that I will highlight? This is a cheap answer probably, but this is a book I think about still a lot. I read this probably 3 or 4 years ago. It's Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. There's been a movie adaptation of it, and so Brian Stevenson he's essentially, this is cheapening what he does, but he advocates for and seeks justice for folks on death row, and you get in Just Mercy stories from his experiences as we might think of as like an intern, but then also as an attorney. Really moving stories about folks who are wrongfully, I guess not necessarily wrongfully convicted is the word. And so he gets a lot of folks off of death row, and also watches some folks not be able to get off of death row. And so it's just a really moving book that is moving because of the stories that it tells. And I think also for the lessons that it offers about race and justice and redemption and forgiveness. So those are a couple of books that I highlight. Actually, no, there's two dudes. So I gotta, you know what? My favorite, the sharpest book that I've read in the last 5 years is this book called Thick, by a Black woman sociologist. Her name is Tressie McMillan Cottom. The name of the book is Thick and Other Essays. And the title of the book, Thick, most of y'all are from Mississippi or from the South. It's thick the way that we use thick. And it's about a Black girl's life, and she's from North Carolina. It's about race and gender and a Black girl and some of her experiences, but also it's like a really sharp it's really sharp commentary on race and inequality and pop culture in the U.S. And it's really well written. It was a National Book Award finalist. A National Book Award is like the Grammys for, or that's at least one way to think about it, for writers. And it was a finalist for that, which is tough to get. So Thick and Other Essays is a book. Sing Unbury Sing, Jasmine Ward. She's won the National Book Award twice, which is unheard of. It's fiction. It's really dope. I could talk about books all day. So that's a few books, or however many books I named. Other questions? I appreciate that one.
Someone echoed and said, Just Mercy is definitely an awesome book. If you've only seen the movie, you have to read the book.
Yep.
Another question is, why Clarksdale? What made you choose Clarksdale out of anywhere else in the Delta?
I appreciate that question. It's not like a good story. I came back to Mississippi thinking I was doing a project on race and education. Initially, I was going to Meridian in 2014. Meridian was going through this Department of Justice investigation for their the punishment policies of the school, like how it seemed that the school was punishing Black students more harshly for infractions. In many cases, the same infractions that their white counterparts were receiving less harsh punishments for. There's a much cleaner way I could have said that, but I think y'all get the idea. And so I was going to go to Meridian and spend some time in Meridian as this case is unfolding. And around the same time, Clarksdale gets a Black superintendent, and Clarksdale is dealing with this cheating scandal, standardized test cheating scandal in one of the elementary schools. And so I see those two headlines, and I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna go to Clarksdale. Clarksdale's a little closer to the University of Mississippi, and I was gonna try to get this visiting scholar set up where I could have some workspace on campus. But that's really it. That's really the answer. Is I saw enough of those headlines about Superintendent Dupree and that cheating scandal, and that just kind of pulled me in the direction of Clarksdale. Pretty quickly after getting to Clarksdale, I realized that I wasn't writing a book or telling a story about race and education. It was something much bigger. And then that took the shape of a blues book, a blues project, which ain't really a blues project. Blues is the vehicle, but the ideas are far beyond the blues. So yeah, it's not the best story, but that's the story.
What made you interested in the field of sociology?
My mentor at the University of Mississippi, her name is Dr. Andrea Robinson. She's now at Georgetown. She was at Ole Miss when I was an undergrad. I was at FAM that was my major. I had taken, I think, 3 or 4 sociology courses, intro, urban, I think 3. And she recommended when I got to the point where I realized a PhD was something I wanted to do, she recommended that I do sociology instead of African American studies. Why? It'd be much easier to apply for jobs in African American studies with the PhD in sociology. Be much more difficult to apply for jobs in sociology with a PhD in African American studies. So it was like strategy. It was to make myself as nimble and appealing as I could be when it came time to apply for jobs. And that proved true. Like I'm jointly appointed now in sociology and in Southern Studies. Ain't no Southern Studies PhDs getting jobs in sociology departments. So that ain't no good story either. I mean, I was African American Studies. The types of questions that I've always had about the world have been the types of questions that sociologists ask. Why questions? How questions? But as far as how I got to a sociology PhD program, I listened to somebody whose opinion I trusted.
The next one, I'm interested to know about the book and definitely plan on purchasing. Can you share your experience in Clarksdale? How different was it from growing up in North Mississippi?
That's a really good question because people assume that Mississippi is Mississippi. I've done so many of these kinds of things that I don't remember when or with who I was having this conversation with. But everybody, if y'all from Mississippi, y'all have had this experience where you are somewhere. If you've been out of Mississippi and you somewhere and you tell them you from Mississippi, and if they know somebody from Mississippi, they're gonna ask you if you know them. Like Mississippi is a town. Like Mississippi is, and so I appreciate this question because it like the reality of Mississippi is that there are a handful of regions and by extension regional cultures. Northeast Mississippi, North Central Mississippi, so like Oxford, Holly Springs, Tupelo, Boonville, Baldwin, is called the Hill Country. Clarksdale and on down is Mississippi Delta. The central Mississippi, some folks call it the Piney Woods, and then you get to the Gulf Coast. And each of these places have different cultures. If y'all have been to the coast, y'all know that ain't like the Delta. And to the point of this question, the Delta ain't like Mississippi. Ain't like Mississippi, ain't like Northeast Mississippi, ain't like Lee County, so forth and so on. And my experience was, it was tough. It was tough. The Delta, there's a different level of like folks in the Delta are dealing with a different type, like a different degree of challenges than folks in other parts of the state. The Delta is not just one of the poorest regions in the state of Mississippi, but is one of the poorest regions in the nation. And I always say after making that point, that the reason that is the case is not because of folks in the Delta today. Place is not just about today and now, is an important point. Place is about history. The way that Oxford looks right now, it didn't just fall out the sky. The way that Boonville, Baldwin, Tupelo look right now, it didn't just grow out of the ground. It is a result of historical processes. It's the result of policy decisions. And the same is the case for the Delta, where slavery is replaced by sharecropping and tenant farming. And then almost overnight, sharecropping and tenant farming is replaced by nothing. You've got thousands and thousands and thousands of sharecroppers and tenant farmers who are evicted from the land that they worked on, and Many of them end up on that trail to Chicago and Detroit. Some of us know as the Great Migration, but many other folks remain, and they remain again in a place where racism, where Jim Crow don't just disappear; it changes forms, and so there are those types of challenges, compounded by structural challenges, literally just a lack of opportunities. So the Delta is a place where people are dealing with circumstances that just are unparalleled in other parts of the state. Certainly in the life that I had. I grew up with both of my parents. My daddy was an entrepreneur, and my mama, I was just talking to her yesterday. She might be here. My mama would work 15 jobs. And one thing that they did for my brother and me is provided us with space to explore the things that we were interested in. If I wanted a book, most of the time I could get the book. And so the experience in Clarksdale was challenging in that I care deeply about the human condition, and especially the conditions of life for people who look like me, and for people who are from places like the one that I'm from. In seeing people struggle and not have access to the basic things that they need was hard for me. I was depressed and sick, and I moved to Clarksdale on a Wednesday. On Saturday, a young guy, I think he was 19, he may have been 18. The oldest he was 19, was found shot in the head, dead in an abandoned house, 3 or 4 streets over from the house that I was living in. And it was those kinds of stories and getting them over the course of the year and a half that I was in Clarksdale and close to Clarksdale that did take a toll. It was, I think the first answer is that it was challenging. And the more time that passes, that absolutely remains. But just seeing how people, and even in hindsight, in the moment and in hindsight, seeing how that place welcomed me and supported me, and so many people stuck their necks out to provide, here's somebody you need to talk to. Come talk to my mama. I'm gonna call it. Like, those sorts of connections are invaluable for the kind of work that I do, and having so many people open up to me in that way, it ain't enough time, it ain't enough years for me to express the gratitude that I have. So that's a little bit about it. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation, but I do appreciate that question. Other questions?
In your career, do you plan to work in other communities other than the rural Black communities? For example, Black communities within a bigger city? Maybe so. Eventually. I always say now my research interests are in general around the everyday experience. It's about my research interests involve or center on like community life. What is life for life? What is life like for folks in the places that they live in? And right now my work lives in Mississippi. It lives in rural communities in Mississippi. I got more projects that I can manage right now, all set in different places in rural Mississippi. At some point, that may turn into a project that's set in, an urban area, maybe eventually. Right now, that isn't on my plate. Everything that I have going on is, if not rural Mississippi, rural South. And I wouldn't have it any other way. That's the work that moves me. That is the work that invigorates me. Appreciate that question. Others? Are there any people in Clarksdale that you took too quickly and formed a personal relationship with? How did their personal stories affect you and the outcome of your book? Oh, that's a really good question. So I just in the interest of time, because I'd like to get to as many questions as possible. One person who I developed a friendship with and who I have maintained that friendship with is a guy who in the book I call Boys Shumpert. There may be some people on here that is kind of honoring a family member who recently passed. But one thing that ethnographers do, if you write a book about your work, is that you use pseudonyms. You don't use the names of the actual folks. And so I call them boys in the book
and we were about the same age. He's a few years older than me, but we were close in age when I was in Clarksdale. We developed a friendship pretty quickly. I talk about him a lot in the book. I start chapter 3 with a kind of a story that involves him, and he's somebody that I kind of started to build this relationship with, or this friendship with, early on, and it was relationships like the one with him that I value so much, because he held me accountable. He wasn't a yes man. It wasn't always, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. It was sometimes, well, wait a minute now, or that right there, that ain't it. And it's that kind of feedback that proved to be really valuable and important for the work, for the project itself. And then the friendship has continued. We organized, last year it was virtual, obviously for obvious reasons, the first Juneteenth commemoration in Clarksdale, and he was the impetus for that work, and he invited me in on the project, and he's doing some more work in Clarksdale this year. But that's one relationship, and there are 30 other ones like that. I appreciate that question. I think we got time for more. I can keep going.
Okay. It says, why do you think people, in quotation, remain in places that they are surrounded by people, yet do not look like?
Why do people so I don't know if I quite understand the question, but the spirit of the question, I think, like, people remain in places for lots of reasons. Some of those reasons can be what sociologists call structural. It takes a lot of resources, money, a job. It takes lots of cultural capital, know-how, to uproot yourself from a place that is familiar and move to a place that's not familiar. No matter how unhappy you are, no matter how toxic the place feels, it's an accomplishment to be able to move from one place to the next. People who suggest otherwise, I think, are being disingenuous. So a part of the reason, I think, is it could be structural. A part of the reason could be identificational. It could be sentimental. This is home. This is the place I have a connection to. It might not be much, but it's mine, sort of deal. And I think that's a dynamic that I remember a while back writing a paper about the folks who stayed in New Orleans as Katrina is approaching the city. Or you can talk about other types of ecological disasters, since Katrina and before. And what you heard from folks is like, this is mine. This is my house. This is what made me. So I think it's a mix of factors that might be, at play if folks stay in places, that maybe they don't always feel as welcome. I feel like the spirit of this question could be somewhere else that I didn't go. I'm sorry. I still appreciate the question. I can answer some more. We can go as long as y'all want.
All right. This says, one of my biggest revelations has been recognizing how I personally fell into systemic racism, such as feeling that straight hair is better than kinky hair, having a need to sound a certain way, frowning on what white America deemed bad. Did you have an aha moment such as this, and at what point in your life did you recognize it?
I appreciate that question. I got to this school in Minnesota, and I vividly remember walking across the campus with Mama, and my brother was there, and my dad was there. But I remember Mama being there, and it just hit me as like, oh, it ain't gonna. I grew up in Shannon. I went to a black church. I lived in a black neighborhood. All my friends was black. Most of the people on the football team was. We walking across campus, and I realized, oh, this ain't gonna be like that. I'm gonna be proud. It's gonna be just me and maybe one. Like, it ain't gonna be that. It was literally in that moment where it was like this is not when I realized like that race was a thing. That had long been the case. But I think this is when like a certain desire to learn more about myself from that perspective was kind of sparked. And it was being in that context, being in a place that was unlike any place I had ever been or seen, that I think sparked it. And I followed that curiosity while I was there. When I got back to the university, got back to Mississippi, to Ole Miss, and yeah, the thing that I would just say, kind of generally, is to give yourself time and space to like learn that part of yourself. It's okay. Like, you used to think this way about straight hair or whatever. And we all come to different types of consciousness in different ways and on our own time. And I think give yourself time. But like pursue that curiosity or pursue that kind of newfound awareness, and try to learn as much as you can, in whatever ways are available to you. I could talk more about that. But again, to keep it short.
Are there any other economists besides Keynes that you would suggest?
How do I want to answer that question? Here's how I answer that question. One thing that was, I remember being like, this is a workaround, because I don't like that question, but and it's not because it's a bad question. It's like for other reasons that require like a bigger conversation. But one thing that was really striking to me when I was doing this work in Clarksdale is that so much of what folks were telling me about Clarksdale was reflected in the data. It's like the best economists are people's lived, like the best the best type of economics is like people's lived experience. People know when jobs are scarce or when good jobs are hard to find. People know when the neighborhood is turning over, whatever that means, whether it's racial turnover or it's socioeconomic turnover. Folks know, and that's something that I'll never forget. That kind of guides the work that I do now. Is you can learn everything you need to know about a place, at least in the here and now, from talking to folks. It takes these other types of data to add context, historical context, and otherwise. You got to go to the archives. You got to read historical accounts. It's worth it to go to the census and see what the official kind of statistics say. But people know the things that are affecting the conditions of their lives. And that's something that I learned that I don't know that I expected, and that I still carry with me. So that's how I'll answer that.
What are some of the research topics that are of interest to you going into the future, or topics that stand out from members of your department?
Oh yeah. There's a she's an anthropologist in our department. Her name is Dr. Jody Skipper, and for quite a while now, probably it's 2021, probably I don't want to say 10 years, more than 5 or 6 years. She's been working on this project called Behind the Big House in Holly Springs, where she and other folks, grad students, other scholars, work to interpret the homes and structures of where enslaved people used to live, right? So there are these, there are these, you can find antebellum mansions, right? The big house, so to speak, in any number of towns, especially in the South. And then in some places you can actually find the outbuildings where enslaved people lived or did other types of work. And so Dr. Jody Skipper has been doing this work of kind of not necessarily bringing those places to life, but visiting those places and using the artifacts that they find there to sketch kind of a portrait of what life was like. And that type of work remains really, really interesting to me. And beyond that, I'm doing a lot of oral history work, which essentially involves going into a community, talking to a bunch of people about something, recording those conversations and depositing those conversations in the archives, right? So you're treating the personal accounts of people as historical documents, as primary source documents. And so that's the work. That's a lot of the work that I'm doing now, not all of it. I could say more. That's a couple. That's a kind of a couple. That's where my work is going in some ways, and then the work of a colleague that I'm definitely inspired and interested by.
Okay. Here's one more. What's your take on the importance of Black students having Black teachers, or at least seeing people who look like them be successful?
Yeah. I think it's vital. I mean, we know from the data that student outcomes, the outcomes of students of color, the outcomes of Black students are better, or they improve when they are taught by a teacher that looks like them. And that's not just like, I only want to have Black teachers and I ain't gonna do my work if I don't have a Black. There is a sense of shared experience and comfort and familiarity with what a student might be dealing with beyond the classroom. There may be a shared way of communicating, all things that facilitate learning. And so we know from the data that it matters. I know from personal experience that it matters. At every turning point in my life, professional and otherwise, I have benefited from perspective and advice from teachers, like faculty members, and now mentors who look like me. And it's not to say that I have not received valuable and useful advice and perspective from white folks, from white faculty or white mentors. And I do have white mentors. And so it's not to say that at all. It's not to suggest that at all. I do not believe that to be the case. But there's absolutely value in this is both empirically, the data say, and then also my personal experience. And then to just, like, for me, I see it as a part of my job to be an advocate for students who look like me. For all students who come through, who come and sit in my classroom or come and sit in my office, and my record suggests as much. My work in the classroom suggests as much. But especially for students who look like me, I'll go the extra mile and a half. Like I'll do whatever it takes to advocate for and to try to make the experiences of students young people who look like me, as not necessarily easy, because I don't think it's about making life easy. But I do think it's about, ensuring that folks know everything that they need to know, for example, to successfully navigate the space. I see it as a part of my job. I don't need no awards for it. I don't need no thank yous for it. It's the bare minimum. It's fundamentally what my job is about, at least the way that I see it. But yeah, I think it's invaluable. I think it's super, super, super important.
And this would be the last one. How can white instructors encourage minority students while still being aware of cultural differences?
Yeah, I think it's don't assume that you know. Don't think that you know. I think that's a starting point. Ask, approach interactions with students of color, with Black students, with a sense of humility. It's like, I don't know what you didn't have to deal with before you got here. And what is more, like, I don't know how the historical traumas that your ancestors, that your great-grandmama or your great-great-granddaddy had to deal with, I don't know the impact that those experiences are having on the shape of your life right now. And the data say that history matters, right? That 2021 didn't just fall out the sky. 2020 was the year before, and what happened then matters for now, and 2010 matters for now, and the civil rights and so forth and so on. And so I think as a first step, it's to approach interactions and approach work that involves students who don't look like you with a sense of humility. I don't know and you don't know, right? Like, I don't know what your experiences have been and how that might be shaping what I see in this particular interaction. And I think let that inform. When I talk to folks about when I teach interviewing, long form interviewing, one of the commandments, this is the language that I use, is you don't know, ask, which is to say, don't assume, don't think, ask, and let that curiosity inform your practice, inform what you do. That right there is not just a class, not just like another conversation. That's a whole class to teach. But I do think that's a starting point, and I think the fact that is a question, I think is, perhaps that bodes well for the type of work that I think is necessary for all teachers to be resources and advocates for students who don't look like them, for students who don't share similar experiences as them.
That is all. That was
good.
Very insightful. That was a lot. That was good.
I enjoyed this. Yeah. I appreciate that.
And there was a comment, not necessarily a question, from Miss Valerie Ross. She said, "No questions, just a comment. I enjoyed hearing about your journey. I will be purchasing the book, and I will be looking for the author to sign my book."
Hey, Miss Ross. Thank you, Miss Ross. I'll sign your book, Miss Ross. I appreciate that, Miss Ross. I'll be talking to you soon.
All right. And as mentioned in the beginning, I'm going to go ahead and attempt to post the link for the students that are in attendance. Hopefully this works. I posted the link in the chat. There's also the QR code. So if you want to take that QR code and scan it using your camera on your phones, you can do that as well for the attendance form. So the link is posted in the chat, and then you should be able to see the QR code on your screen, and just complete that form, and you will receive credit for attendance. Okay. So I guess we can kind of leave that up. Dr. Brian Foster, do you have any closing remarks that you would like to give?
No, I think I didn't talk to I really do appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate the work that y'all are doing. Like, I think this is a good, I think this is a good thing, like a good initiative to be putting time and energy into, and to try and continue. So I appreciate the work y'all are doing and the opportunity. This was fun. Had a good time with the questions. Thanks for those. And y'all can find me. It's pretty easy to find me online. B. Brian Foster on social media. b.brian.foster@gmail. If you want to send an email. Website is the same, bbrianfoster.com. So y'all feel free to reach out for whatever reason, for any reason. And yeah.
And I know your book is available on Amazon. Are there any other sources?
Yeah. The easiest place will be Amazon. You could also go to the publisher site, which is UNC Press. You could just Google "I Don't Like the Blues" and Barnes and Noble, anywhere where books are sold. Amazon is generally the easiest and quickest, and you can get like Prime shipping and all of that. So yeah, I think that's probably what I would recommend.
Okay. Well, again, we appreciate you. I thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I think it was very valuable. The information was very insightful. And if nothing else, we will end this meeting.
Okay. All right.
Again, we'll leave the QR code up for the students if you haven't received it or if you haven't gotten it. But this concludes our event, our presentation for tonight.